So I guess to carry on the tradition of the previous speaker using one of the Python references, now something completely different. Again, my name is Stephen Kleinschmit. I'm from the Department of Public Administration. I am the civic analytics guy there, that's kind of working on a number of different things. But social media network analysis isn't something that's completely new. It's new to being used to solve public problems, though. It's been taught for quite a bit. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Didn't want to make sure I didn't get all that stuff. So applying this type of technology to public problems is something that is relatively new, and it's been kind of fun being able to be one of the advocates of trying to bring this methodology into courses in public affairs and showing people what are the sort of utility of doing this type of visualization. So I wanted to at least show, kind of explain what this is. I was mapping, I'm an NC State grad, and this is from a couple weeks ago from during a football game. The people who were kind of interacting with the NC State Wolfpack hashtag, and I know it's kind of sort of a fun kind of throwaway thing, but I found I chose this one in part because go Wolfpack, but also because I liked sort of that it showed sort of the complexity of the networks and conversation networks that came around, even during not even sort of sustained conversations, even ones that happen episodically or happen in a very short time frame, that these complex kind of structured network interactions happen. And I thought it was fascinating because you can probably see the clusters and some of the lines around there, but like they're all using sort of the same kind of language and same identifiers, but they definitely break themselves down into groups based on key characteristics. They all identify essentially along certain characteristics, and once you're able to learn how to do the analysis, you can start pulling out sort of their terminology and identify sort of distinguishing characteristics. So you might have things like, an alumni, the Alumni Association network, which is one of the larger networks, the marching band network, some sort of student association. There might be some other ones that are kind of hangers-on from other sort of sporting organizations, or even like, I guess, corporate types. But you see this complex network structure that emerges that we tend to think that they're not particularly well sorted, or that people are acting in kind of ways that are independent of each other. But it turns out that there are key influencing individuals. There are a very defined network structure that people receive information through influential individuals who act as conduits to pushing that information down to sometimes secondary and tertiary and quaternary kind of networks and stuff like that. So that sort of snowball effect of viralness is something that more people understand since 2016. Just leave it at that. But yeah, that's part of this thing. But yeah, so and again, it's like I always find that people find it fascinating and say, this is public service, this is public interest type stuff, and it's like, yeah, there's a lot of manifestations to this. So this big question. So why do we want to even know social media? First, we know a lot about formal communication networks. We study hierarchy, structure of organizations, be they hierarchical, kind of the traditional, like I'm an Army vet, so I always use hierarchical organizations like the military, because it has a very rigid command structure that everyone knows. You have your generals, lieutenant colonels, brigade, all the way down to platoon and stuff like that, where you've seen organizational charts and everybody knows who talks to who and reports to who and what the formal communication channels should be, or what they were designed to be. But a big part of organizational theory is that informal communication networks sprout up, and these can be as important, if not more than important, than the formal structure of formally defined communication networks. So understanding informal communication networks, not how we want information to be disseminated, but how it is disseminated is incredibly important. Events, be they political world events, they change the network structure and communication. I was doing a analysis of COP22 climate change proceedings. It was, I believe, in Marrakesh, Morocco, about 2 years ago, and because of a tweet by Donald Trump, essentially about kind of neglecting sort of, or I think at least taking issue or umbrage with some of the chatter on Twitter about climate change. It essentially changed the entire structure of the network, and people were talking about, all right, so let's get together, let's find these common solutions, let's focus on the discourse, and it was very much internal to the people who were within that network, and all of a sudden the entire network structure changed. You had a lot of these outside entrants coming in. You started seeing some of the botnet networks activate, some of the disinformation campaigns that were coming around. So the whole idea of being able to disrupt discourse in conversations about policy topics and political topics is incredibly important. But yeah, the sort of tragedy of the commons, if you will, of communication. You can evaluate power relationships and even network sentiment. So in terms of power relationships, just going back to these networks, who are the most influential individuals or networks? When you're looking to map an entire sort of policy space or a conversation around a policy space, who are the ones who are driving the conversation? It may not be who you think, and it often, information takes a circuitous route to getting places that it would otherwise not get. Also with network sentiment, are people mostly positive or negative in respect to their way they conceptualize whatever network or whatever topic they're discussing about? We have that ability through sentiment analysis to essentially be able to quantify, to a good extent, what is the aggregate degree of sentiment of a particular network and whatnot. Is it being positively framed, negatively framed, things like that. I've already kind of hit on identifying sources of information and disinformation. Okay, one example that I was going to give just a little bit later, but I might as well do now. Previously coming to UIC, I was a professor at another institution that experienced a active shooter event. What was not, the shooter event was adjacent to campus, but not on campus. And because of this, there was a very slow response with alerting the emergency management systems. And law enforcement, I think it was about an hour and 45 to 2 hours and 15 minutes after the event had started, there was a formal statement that had actually been communicated out to the emergency management system. So what happened is that in the absence of a directed response by law enforcement agencies, that the prime mechanism for getting information about this was instead kind of hearsay and conjecture that was born online. And because of this, a lot of disinformations and mistruths were happening. And this is actually, it wasn't like the first time it happened. I was even at a previous school where you had an active shooter event at one of the branch campuses. Or as you know how like some schools, there's University of Michigan, University of Michigan Flint, University of North Carolina, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. But when people say, oh, there was a shooting at, this particular institution, 16 or 17 different institutions might be referred to, I guess, as, UNC or Purdue or U of M or something like that. And because of that, that information spread so far beyond its intended audience that it was starting to cause problems and issues at sort of branch campuses where these events were not happening. So in some respects, being able to understand the response models and try to think about, be proactive in thinking about how disinformation can disrupt potential sources of emergency response or civil defense or all sorts of different things like that, even planning and prevention activities and stuff like that. And finally, is something else the previous speaker talked about. Citizens can act as censors for government response. So when you follow social media, all right, so somebody sees a flooded bridge and they post a picture of it online and said, oh, the bridge is this such and such with the geotag location from people's smartphones. you know, a municipal government doesn't have thousands upon thousands of municipal employees who can go out and constantly monitor every single aspect of a evolving fluid kind of emergency response. So having those citizens actually acting as sensors is pretty important, but also allows us to understand kind of real time the effect of those citizen sensors and towards not only providing information up channel to the government unit, but also down channel. How do they actually influence the emergency response themselves, which I found is fascinating. Real world applications. First of all, a lot of organizations do social media badly, particularly in the public sector. I'm trying not to beat them up too much. Hand it over to the intern who's going to be there for 3 or 4 months. They don't understand the relationships, they don't understand the language of the field or have the social relationships, and because of that, you see a lot of you probably see these ghost accounts that were started in 2015. You have, hello, this is our first tweet. You've got 3 other things that are just retweeted, and then they give up. It doesn't work. There are network structures of successful organizations that are able to engage in, you know, they use that, you know, they use what I call a push model, that they push information to other users by tagging them or using hashtags. They build their user base first. There's all sorts of different strategies for doing this, but you don't know you're doing it poorly until, you know, unless you evaluate it. So that's part of it. Or, you know, assessing again their network centrality, how much they drive the conversation, which sometimes is scary if your municipality is the one essentially trying to direct the conversation, and somebody else is kind of co-opting the conversation and whatnot. I'm not saying that always is about it, but when you get to misinformation, it can be problematic. Identifying key individuals in affiliated organizations and advocacy and philanthropy networks. You can teach people who, you know, say somebody graduates from, you know, grad school here at UIC or undergrad, and then they go work in New York, and they can spend years upon years trying to figure out who are the movers and shakers and the people who actually matter in sort of certain policy and rhetoric spaces. And why not just run the analysis, and you can get probably a fairly, you know, you'll get in the neighborhood at least, and running these analysis, and you can figure out who are the important actors, who talks to who, and of course you can sort of see, kind of preview sort of some of the ethical considerations. You even see these things online, but this technology is being used, and everything's out there and available. So I guess watch that. But yeah, I did a seminar at another university about how to identify key individuals in philanthropy networks. So it's small nonprofits that are looking to partner with organizations towards funding and financing kind of, and finding funder networks. This is another sort of application that we can use it for. Law enforcement has used it for gang-related taunting and intimidation. That the city of Chicago itself uses social network analysis. I haven't got a good gauge of whether or not they use social media network analysis, but I assume that they've at least played with it. But gang-related taunting and intimidation, that there's quite a bit of this, and it's actually something I had a conversation with students in my urban policy process class earlier this week about essentially how social media has changed gang discourse. And even kind of with the Robert Putnam Bowling Alone kind of social cohesion, people aren't joining the PTA, or veterans aren't joining the Veterans of Foreign War, American Legion, but also gang members aren't engaging in the same sort of gang structures they were before. It's much more disconnected, disjointed, fragmented, localized versus kind of structured and stuff like that. So yeah, that criminal activity, intimidation, these sort of things can map to connections. I'd already mentioned understanding vectors for information during emergencies. This one's kind of become more emergent in those who study sort of emergency management. But again, the complex stakeholder and policy actor networks. How do you know who you need to talk to, who you need to engage, or even people who are engaged in the conversation? So this at least provides some way for us to consider, you know, what are these things we can do. So there is a center, CC and SO, Center for Complex Networks, Center for Complex Networks and Systems Research at Indiana University, that's being headed by I believe his name's Filippo Mincer. He was kind of, they were in the news a little bit in 2014 when they developed this kind of much more artificially intelligent, big, very substantial computational power, using supercomputers to download millions of tweets and be able to understand this, to understand disinformation campaigns. I've got two of their visualizations here. On the left, it's people who are talking about the sky in blue, and in yellow is chemtrails conspiracies. Okay. Yeah, and then you have anti-vaxxers doing a few other things like that. They also have a tool called Hoaxy that today you can go home and play on the internet and go onto their website and search for hashtags and for users, and they will rate them as the likelihood of exhibiting bot-like behavior or information networks that are exhibiting kind of bot-like behavior. The networks are much less read than they used to be because of some of the things that Twitter has done. So what I do want to show you is NodeXL. NodeXL is the gateway to essentially bigger and better kind of social network analysis kind of tools. NodeXL it's Excel-based. It was created by the Social Media Research Foundation. It's this kind of collection of academics that started a nonprofit. Because it's Excel-based, it's a template that is used on top of Microsoft Excel. It's very simple to use. It's very simple to install, and it's sort of a familiar environment for most people. The premium version is it costs a little. I think it's worth it. Allows you to analyze up to 18,000 tweets at a time. The basic version allows you to do 2,000 tweets, and for a lot of smaller networks, that's perfectly fine. You will need social media accounts to collect the data. You don't have to post, you don't have to tweet, you don't have to put your name, but you do need the authorization credentials to be able to access the network. So that's something I'll at least put out. For very large inquiries, it can be computationally intensive. You see that I have like a gaming laptop here, which I got the department to buy, telling them it's like, you're gonna have some real power to run these things. Most queries can be run on your average laptop, but when you're doing really, certain operations are very intense and need the power. I do know that certain services have limitations. Twitter allows you to search for the last 18,000 tweets over the 7 days. So if you're doing something that's really big, or like a current news event, sometimes you can download 18,000 tweets and the time span was only in the last few minutes. Versus some other things that it might take literally days. You might have almost the entire set of tweets in there. Do note that Twitter has an algorithm search. It has a search algorithm just like Google does, so that it can selectively omit some things sometimes if it's not done correctly. And also Gephi and Mozda are other free tools for visualization. So I'll get in just a second, but this visualization I'm showing is one I did. I have this fun thing I do for conferences. I download people who use the conference hashtag, and I do a little Twitter campaign to show who are like the top 10 most influential users. So I say, who's the most influential users? This was at our competitors, NASPA, but American University, UMass, University of Baltimore, certain individuals that are kind of known in there, just being able to do it as a fun thing, but also we generate so many different, there's so many different types of metrics that can be derived from this that it's much more than just a fun thing. And then finally, for the demonstration, there is Mozda, which allows you to download these tweets and do what's called like time series analysis or burst analysis. And it's not just that people tweet, but it's when they tweet, it's to what extent. It's kind of like the relationship between rain and flooding, that you have a kind of a lag effect, and then you have an explosion and things change there. So I can open a new instance in this. And I'll just kind of do this on the fly, just to show you just kind of how easy it is. So I'm opening up a template that is from NodeXL. It creates this nice little window, and it tells you all these great things. But what it does is it creates, you open Excel, it creates this new document window over here that is for your visualizations, but it also has a new function group here at the top. And I've customized a little bit over time, but within the function group, now you see things like you can import data from Facebook fan page, group networks, from Flickr users networks, from Twitter search networks, YouTube user comments. There's even more specialized ones that are for other social networks that we don't traditionally use. So from Twitter search network, I am going to do GISDay. I'm going to search for the hashtag GISDay. I recommend turning off this expand URLs in tweets because it almost always takes forever to do. So it says, I'm getting page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. And then it'll say, oh, we get 6. It only had 5 or 6. It only had like 6 a couple hours ago. Yeah. Luckily, if it ends up getting locked up, I've got other instances where I already downloaded it. I've done this before. It sometimes can get silly. Yeah, so I'm just going to do it now instead of having like a lot of uncomfortable sounds. It's like I just downloaded them an hour or 2 ago, and there was only 5 or 6 pages. So evidently
Everybody's tweeting.
Everybody's active here. So you download the tweets, and you'll get something that looks like this. And it'll download the tweets and the active and reply to users, and you'll get this nice big kind of jumble. And if you don't see it at first, you'll have to hit refresh grab, but it'll show up there. And then you have different visualizations you can use, and this is before we even do the sorting. So these Fruchterman and Reingold and the Harrow-Coren fast multiscale are the most used ones, but they lead to kind of different interpretations of the network structure. And then we want to start kind of grouping and sorting these things out. So I'm going to group by cluster being sort of how they're arranged through kind of influential individuals. And I'll leave all the default options in there, so it's calculating the clusters. And then still, it'll give us some colors, but it won't change the structure until we direct it. Now I'm going to go to, all right, so put in directed layout options. Now I'm going to sort them into boxes because I want each group to be in its own box, and then we can start kind of seeing how these things sort out. So to sort it into boxes, I refresh it. Now we have the tweets essentially grouped by network and sort of interacting, seeing some of the interactions. Yeah, so this is great. So, we have all the individual edges, vertices, and the data is really quite, it gives you quite a bit. It'll give you the original link. I've calculated in degree, out degree. I think this might actually be from my head. Yeah, I've already run these just so. Just like before, if you run the, if you run the graph metrics, which is essentially, I want to know all the things about the tweets. Who are talking within each network, what language they were using, what the sentiment is, all that stuff like that. If you activate all these, even on a fast computer, let's say all except for the last 2, it'll take about a minute to run, a minute and a half, and other than having us just sitting here and looking at each other, and being uncomfortable. So I already calculated these, and I think I went over 2 things. Okay, so I have them on there, or sorry. One thing you get from having too many windows. It was the window that we had everything originally. So here are the overall metrics. It gives you sort of a big overview of number of vertexes and individual people and stuff like that. But then you start getting into, all right, so what are the actual terms that are being used? Top hashtags in tweet, in entire graph. Of course, GISDay, because we're searching for your GISDay, but these things, geospatial, geography, geography awareness week, other things like that. What top links have people posted in this network? So, of course, our GIS is going to be there in Esri and all those and stuff like that. But the geospatial world, things like that. And then you start kind of burrowing down in here. There's the kind of sentiment analysis, the positive versus negative words, the ones that are not categorized.
So sorry, for the positive and negative, do you determine ahead of time which ones are positive, or?
You can. I'm using just the default options, but yeah, I think things like happy might be put in there. Like I have to go back through the kind of the term list as it's been defined, but I know that you can adjust those. But top word pairs, happy GISDay, of course, we can put together, all these stuff like that. But within each top reply to an entire graph, so who are the people who are getting to reply to the most? Who are the people who are, what are the accounts, rather, that are mentioned the most in the entire graph? So as we, OA car services, I don't know who they are. I'm probably saying that. It's probably something everybody in geography understands.
I don't know.
I've been out of the game for a while, so as a geography undergrad major. Ordnance survey, Copernicus at EU, Youth Mappers, UCC. Stuff like that. Top tweeters, who are the ones who the most influential tweeters and stuff like that. And then I probably didn't select the thing that you can do individual subgroup analysis. So it'll take group 1, group 2, group 3, all the way to like I think for the first 25 groups, and it'll run those same sort of analytics as well. So that being said, that's kind of just the quick and short of social media network analysis through Node Excel. What questions do you have?
Is there any spatial data to this?
There are ways to be able to link them. Gosh, I don't know if I want to go here and start looking through it. It's like they have, if the accounts it's downloading have a geographic descriptor to it. Like I think sometimes it will say like New York, or they have other ways of linking. Maybe if I can find out the verses. So I have seen. Yeah, here we go, location. Yeah, so you have it and you can actually spatially map it on there. So
And this comes from their tweet, that's how you find this? Or I know sometimes at Twitter you just have their GPS location tag.
I don't believe that the GPS location is tagged on here. I think these are probably the self-identified, either identified by Twitter or it might.
But they're where the user's from sometimes.
Yeah. I'd have to go back and look through that. But it's either geolocated by Twitter where the account is, or if it's self-identified. But either way, there is some spatial way to match this.
Yeah, I was going to ask this to the other presenter, and I think it's relevant here too. Just wondering if you could talk about the challenges and maybe things that you found that worked well for translating everything you've talked about here to policymakers or people who want to, be influenced by the findings of your software. There's a lot of words and a lot of methods that are really challenging for policymakers or planners too, right? Planners in public administration who are in the field, who maybe have a set way of doing things. What have you found are some of the ways you can...
I find like the existence of a visualization in a space where none has been done before, where it's usually been some sort of anecdote, or it's been some like that. There's going to be people who are spatial learners, and there are people who are like text-based kind of learners and stuff like that, and anecdotal. But it's like I think to some respect that just the nature of showing the visualization is something that I've impressed with. Just shown upon people is that. I don't know, perhaps it's kind of a trust in technology, maybe it's a trust in these methods and stuff like that, but yeah, there is kind of a high bar because there is kind of a bit of a technology anxiety to a lot of legislators and professional types, but I think that the biggest thing is just showing people that this is something you can do and linking results, and this is something I do for my own department that helps us kind of look towards our engagement strategy and stuff like that, and we tried it out and it worked, and we continue to do it. So, so yeah, I guess the $64,000 question I probably can't answer, but I'd say just the idea of being able to visualize something and visualize relationships is sometimes entree enough to have a deeper conversation.
I'm sorry if you mentioned this, but in this graphic here, in that box in the top left, that blue one, like what is that telling us? Is that like a certain topic or word?
Oh, this one up here?
Yeah.
This is group one. Like essentially, this is the largest group with the most connected attributes, and essentially, it's the I believe so. I have to look at the metrics, but it's the group that is most influential in directing conversations across the network. It's got the most kind of I guess directed responses inward or outward, however they're quantified. I believe I have a degree on here and stuff like that. So yeah, that's when you're calculating the metrics, it ranks the networks from the most to least influential, and then kind of that helps you sort of.
Well, we gotta move on, but remember, we've got lunch and networking time so that we can continue asking questions to Stephen, but thank you very much. We're gonna switch to the next presenter.